listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, this is Scott Bissell from the Center for Faculty Excellence and welcome to today's webinar. This is one of the sessions that we offered at the recent faculty meeting, and we wanted to also bring this to you in a virtual format, so if you weren't able to participate before, you can do so today. Leading our session today will be Dr. Amy Pizzella, who is from the Center for Research Quality, and she is an Associate Director in the Center for Research Quality in the Curriculum and Assessment area. So in just a moment, I will turn things over to her, but before we do that, just want to do a couple of overviews of how to use the GoToWebinar software in case you haven't participated in a webinar with us before. You should be seeing the full control panel on the left side of the screen that I'm showing on my PowerPoint. It should be showing over here to the right for you. If it's not looking like this and instead it's showing the minimized view, all you have to do is just click the button and the maximized view will return and you'll have access to all the features on the control panel. There may be times when you want to click that button again just to minimize it if any of the text is being blocked on the screen by the control panel. So you can toggle back and forth between those views. If you've not already done so, you may want to just click the audio setup link to make sure you're able to hear everything okay through your speakers and the microphone. When you do the test, don't worry about the sound coming through the test system. It will just stay within the test system and won't be broadcast out to the room. We've actually put everyone's microphone on mute just to cut down on any background noise so that you're able to clearly hear the presenter. We want to get your thoughts and questions throughout the session, and there's a couple ways you can do that. The first way is through the questions area. Just put your thoughts or questions in the bottom of the box here and send it off to us, and we'll respond to it at the next available time. If you want to ask your question or share your thoughts out loud, because we will be looking at some abstract examples, so there'll be an opportunity for you to react to those. If you want to participate out loud, just click that raise hand button, and we will be able to unmute you and you can share out loud. A couple of other housekeeping items. If you have any technical support difficulties, if you want to send them through the chat area, you can do that through the questions box. If that's not working and you are still having technical difficulty, the phone number on the screen you can use and call GoToWebinar Tech Support. They are a live tech support team. They'll be able to help you. I have put a closed captioning link into the questions area if you want to follow along with the webinar that way. And at the end of the session, I'll put an evaluation link also in the questions area to get your feedback on today's session and for you to voice any other development needs you have in your role at the university. So just a few items of how to participate today, and I will now turn things over to Dr. Annie Pizzella, who will take it away from here. Annie, go ahead and share your screen whenever you're ready.
Sounds great. Thank you, Scott. And hi, everybody. Welcome. Welcome. Thanks so much for coming to this webinar today. And thanks, Scott, for helping to facilitate so graciously. I'm going to be relying on Scott a few times throughout the webinar today just for some interactive opportunities for us. There's some polling, like Scott said. We hope that this can be as truly as interactive as possible. I know that's sometimes a challenge with a webinar. We don't get to see each other. But this is a topic that I feel really strongly about and something that I hope can be a very collaborative experience. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'll queue up this PowerPoint. Here we go. And the title of this session, as it's slowly coming up, is Approved, Submitting Clear and Concise Abstracts. So we have a variety of objectives for the session today. We'll define abstracts, we'll discuss their importance. We'll work on understanding the unique features of Walden abstracts, what's very particular about our university, and then also the common pitfalls that our own students experience in writing Walden abstracts. We'll talk about the process of abstract review and approval at Walden. I hope that by the end of this session you'll have bolstered your skills to mentor your students in submitting clear and concise abstracts. And then I'll devote a few moments of time at the end of the presentation to brainstorm about titles, effective study titles. Since what I do in my work as the designee for Dr. Eric Rydell, our Chief Academic Officer, as I review not only the abstract, but the abstract title page as well. So those are our objectives. So our activities, I've sort of broken this down into some discrete activities here, but my hope is that you can stop me at any time. Feel free to ask questions, and Scott and I will help to sort of facilitate answering those questions as we go. But the basic plan, I'd love to just give a very quick introduction of my role, my job at the university, discuss the specific Walden requirements for abstracts. I'll talk about the steps in the review process, common challenges experienced in writing abstracts. And then, like Scott said, we have a few abstracts that I'd like to actually look through together. I'll pull them up on my screen. Scott has also provided those documents within the sort of that pane off to the side of your screen. You can also find the abstracts there, but we'll go through those together, talk about titles, and then offer up some time for some questions and answers. But again, please feel free to stop me at any time. So a brief introduction of my role before we really launch into things. I've been at Walden for about 5 years now. I was a dissertation editor for 3 years in the Writing Center. And then I was an interim director within the Academic Skills Center, and now I am the associate director within the Center for Research Quality. And I do sort of a hodgepodge of duties around the university, but my main task is to be the designee for Dr. Eric Rydell. And I review every piece of research that is about to leave the university. And Eric and I meet often to make sure that we are reliable in our ratings and in my judgments of abstracts so that I'm truly representing him properly as his designee. And typically my job is about 15 to 20 of these abstract reviews every day. So I get to read a lot of research, and I get to read a lot of your students' research. It's really neat seeing who's attending this webinar today, and then I've gotten to read lots of your students' wonderful research. So it's a privilege. I love this part of my job, and it makes me very proud of the university. Our students really do some amazing work. So that's me. So moving on, let's talk a little bit about abstracts, defining them, what they are. And briefly, I apologize. My voice is really scratchy. It's been this way for several weeks. I've just had a cold, so thanks for bearing with me. I hope that it's not too unpleasant to listen to me talk at you. But the American Psychological Association defines an abstract as a brief, comprehensive summary of the contents of an article. And I wanted to provide that definition because I think it speaks very clearly to what an abstract is not. It is not a review. It is not an evaluation of the work being abstracted. So there should be no value judgments in an abstract about the strengths of it or its limitations. There's very little of that. This is simply a brief and comprehensive summary. And then the last bulleted point that I wrote there shows that it is also an original document, not an excerpted passage from the full manuscript. So even though the abstract should contain a lot of keywords from the larger work, it is not something that the student lifts from a paragraph or two, perhaps from the introduction, say, of his or her dissertation, into the abstract page. This should be an original document, one that summarizes the entire study, not just one specific component or one particular paragraph or two from the study. So what comprises an abstract? There's a variety of different things that you might find in an abstract if you pull up a document like this from various universities. But for the most part, you're going to see these things. You'll see the scope and background of the study, the purpose of the study, methods employed, the results, the conclusions, and that's about it. Those are the basic sort of nuggets of information that you'll see in every abstract. And what we've provided in the Center for Research Quality, specifically within our abstract primer, is this quote that an abstract is the window for others into your research. So all those 5 bulleted points here, those really provide the basic information for what's happening in the larger body of the research. It's a window for others into your research. Kind of a lovely phrase. Okay, so what comprises a Walden abstract? Because there are very unique and particular attributes about abstracts that are seen in some universities and not others. So as a Walden faculty member or a Walden staff member, if you're a Walden student, what is it that you need to know to make sure that you're complying with all the requirements for our university in writing an abstract or in mentoring a student to write an abstract? So there's the research problem and importance. That was evident in the previous slide. That's something that you'll often find. Purpose of the study. Sure, this is all pretty straightforward. But a conceptual or theoretical framework. What I put in bold in these bullets are the specific components that are unique about Walden. Well, all Walden abstracts should include the conceptual or theoretical framework that a student has employed in his or her study. And if no framework was used, then that should also be specified. This theoretical study examined the relationship between X, Y, Z. Also note, in an abstract, and we can talk about more details about this later, but an abstract should contain no parenthetical citations at Walden. And so if you are citing Bronfenbrenner's ecological theory, you would simply write Bronfenbrenner's ecological theory. There would be no parenthetical after the name Bronfenbrenner to signify the year of that theory's publication. So research questions. This is also a bolded bulletin point because this is often specific about Walden. Research questions must be specified in a Walden abstract, although I'll pause here real quickly. This is just keeping you all on your toes. Anyone know of the unique attributes of research questions? How should they be presented in a Walden abstract? Feel free to type this in to your chat or the questions, and I'll give you just a second. If this is stumping everybody, then I'll just go on. But this is a little trick question. And this gives me a chance to get a quick sip of water. Hints. How should it be presented? With what kind of punctuation? Good question, Christopher. With a question mark. That's actually, so the trick is that research questions within Walden abstracts should be presented as declarative statements and not as research questions. So instead of saying, thanks Christopher, so instead of saying, this research study examined the question, what is the relationship between exposure of sunlight and mental health? Question mark. It would need to be rephrased as, this research study examined the relationship between exposure to sunlight and mental health, period. No question mark should be added. So that's a unique component of the Walden abstract. So I've sort of given away the rest of the unique elements of Walden abstracts. You can see here which ones are bulleted, which ones are not. So beyond what we've covered already, I apologize, this takes just a minute for it to refresh on my screen. Research design methods, conclusions, or data analysis, key findings, conclusions, recommendations, implications for positive social change. So that is the other very unique element of a Walden abstract that should be included in every Walden abstract that's written. There should be some explanation about who will benefit from the research findings and in what way exactly. And the more specific you can be about that, the better. So I know this might be, if this is new information to you, this might feel like a lot and it might be quite unfamiliar. You might be asking for, where you might be able to get other resources to really bolster your skills, to mentor your students in writing these abstracts. And there are a variety of places where you can find those. I've pulled up a screenshot of the Center for Research Quality's website where you'll see there's several hyperlinks for abstract assistance. There's abstract guidelines, abstract primer, and there's also an abstract primer video. And then I've also pulled up the hyperlinks for the Writing Center's website where you'll find some information on abstracts. And we have some ELMS tutorials on abstracts that are really nice and interactive. And I encourage you, if you haven't explored these resources before, bookmark them, explore them later at your leisure. And I'll pause real quick because I see the questions pane opening. Although, Scott, am I missing one, or did we already address any questions?
I'm not sure if you handled Donna's question about indicating implications if there were no significant meaningful findings.
Oh, I did not see that. No, would you reiterate that?
Sure. Donna asked, how do you indicate implications if there were no significant or meaningful findings?
That is such a good question, Donna, and I think a lot of faculty really struggle with that and struggle with keeping their students buoyant and energized and excited about their findings if indeed they got non-significant findings from their quantitative analyses. So what's the significance if they found nothing from their analyses? Is there still potential for positive social change? And I say, yes, absolutely, 110% there is. It's just how you, I don't want to say it's how you spin it, Donna, but it really is how you can help articulate what was learned in those analyses. You know, maybe there's no significance in the relationship between the variables that your student wanted to test. But in finding no relationship, that could mean a more focused approach in future research, excluding one of those variables that's been distracting researchers in previous years. Or maybe your student tested the efficacy of some intervention and found absolutely no effect of it. Well, there's positive social change implications from that, in that perhaps money could be better spent elsewhere in the design of a new intervention, one that could promote real significant results or some big change. So you have to think beyond the basic, you know, did I find what I was expecting or did I not, to what might be a slightly more subtle area. But you know, if ever you find yourself in that position and you're really struggling to articulate what those positive social change implications can be, write me. You know, I love to see the full manuscript of what your student's looking at, and we can brainstorm about the ways to articulate those positive social change implications no matter what the results are. So hopefully that's helpful, Donna, but it's a really good question. When Scott and I presented this webinar, last week we found the exact same questions coming up. You know, what do you do if there's non-significant findings? And that's not a deal breaker with real positive social change claims. Thank you for that. Great question. Okay, so I'll move on. So why write an abstract? Why are we spending all of this time? Why are Scott and Manny dedicating all of this time to talking about a document that's just one page long? There are a lot of implications for an abstract and reasons why we devote so much time and energy to it. The biggest reason for writing an abstract is that it helps with selection of future research studies. So abstracts allow readers who might be interested in a longer work to quickly decide whether it's worth their time to read it. So a well-written abstract can clearly tell a reader whether or not the major findings in the study, the larger manuscript, is actually worth their time. And so if an abstract is well written, that's a clear indicator of whether or not that reader should read on. If it's unclear, then a really beautiful study might go completely unread and unnoticed because the abstract is always their first point of contact for the reader, didn't convey that appropriately. So selection is one of the main reasons why abstracts are so important. And also indexing. Online databases use abstracts to index larger works. So that goes back to my, my note a few slides ago about the importance of abstracts containing keywords and phrases that allow for very easy searching. So make sure that all the keywords and phrases from your students or from your own work are always included in the abstract so that it's indexed appropriately. Okay, capstone study review process. A lot of you are real familiar with the process of this review, but just going through this, and this kind of helps situate where my role comes in. In the process, the committee chair works real closely with the student on the premise and prospectus. Committee members come in a bit later. The university research reviewer comes in a bit later to review proposal work and then the final dissertation. The Writing Center staff comes in right at the very end to perform what's called the form and style review, which is a real thorough APA scrubbing of the entire document. And then the chief academic officer, or his designee, which is me, comes in finally at the end. And what I review typically is just the abstract and the abstract title page. I just review 2 pages. And if I find something that seems amiss, then I read the entire manuscript. But that probably happens 5 to 10% of the time. For the most part, everything hangs together in the abstract, leaving me no justification for reading further. And about half of all submitted abstracts are approved on the first review. And I might approve them with revisions or approve without revisions. Most abstracts that I see that are approved on the first time, I require several revisions, but it's only because of some cosmetic errors or some writing-related errors. Nothing substantive needs to change if I can approve something on the first review with revisions. It's just cosmetic stuff, and it's when I have all the confidence in the world that the faculty members on the committee and the student can easily incorporate my required revisions. And the turnaround time for these reviews is pretty fast. My timeline is about 24 hours, sometimes 48 hours, but typically I'm able to return these abstracts within a day. But even so, what are the logistics of those abstract returns? So if something shows up to be a little bit problematic in an abstract, what happens, what's the process, and what does that mean for you and your students? Well, once it leaves my desk, then it goes to our Office for Student Research and Administration, where we have several research specialists that help to channel that abstract back to the committee members in the URR. They send my feedback to the student incorporates it or works on revisions, whatever else the committee members in URR see fit for the student to do. Then it goes back to the committee members in URR, then back to our Office for Student Research and Administration, and then back to me. So, I put this slide together only to show you that, this is a pretty streamlined process. OSRA is really wonderful. They're very fast at what they do. But it's a lot of cooks in the kitchen here. So, what can you do? It's important to think, how can we mentor our students so that by the time their abstract comes to the CAO designee, it has the best shot to be approved on its first review. So here's where Scott and I would love to get some of your feedback. What we've provided here, this is just a list of 5 things, and there are a few other categories that I actually code in every abstract that I review for any problems that I'm seeing in it. But these are kind of the biggies. What we'd love to know, and what Scott will do, he'll open up a poll in just a second, but we want to know, just pick one of these things. Which part of the abstract do you think is most challenging for you to write or your students to write? So we'll pause.
Okay, everyone, the poll is now up on the screen. If you'll just select the radio button to the option that best fits your opinion, and we'll give everyone just another moment to do that, another 5 seconds. All right, looks like most of you have voted, and everyone should be seeing the results now.
Cool. I'm going to pull this open. All right, so it looks like the majority of you voted that the design, analysis, and method is the most challenging part of the abstract for your students to write. followed by the framework, the conceptual or theoretical framework, and then there's a tie between problem statement and social change. So that's really interesting. And I'll go on to actually show you what I've been finding in my own data collection efforts. So, one thing that our Office for Student Research and Administration does is they track the number of abstracts that are approved on first review every month from the CAO designee. And that's really helpful information. But just for my own curiosity and for some other researchy related purposes, I've started to collect my own data for every abstract that I read. I collect information on the general topic of the study, on the conceptual or theoretical framework, on the method used, the design employed, the statistical significance of the findings, and a variety of other things. But I also code, if I return an abstract, I simply put a tally in one of these columns to indicate why I was returning it. Did I return it because of the problem statement, because of the framework, the research questions, or etc.? So here you see the sort of more formal results of my data collection efforts there. And for those of you who wrote about design method and analysis being the most challenging part, there's a lot of truth to that. Although the biggest challenge, just by a hair, what students seem to be struggling with in writing the abstracts is this element of social change. It seems to be a really tricky component of the abstract for students to write and for students to write well. So that's followed by the design method and analysis. Results are quite difficult. And then followed by the theoretical or conceptual framework, and then these other domains of writing the problem statement or just general writing APA errors. And I've written here some percentages are over 100% because many returned abstracts have more than one problem. It's actually pretty common. Any questions or reflections on these results before I move on? All right, if there are none, certainly feel free to type whatever you're thinking and we can get to them at the end, or I can pause wherever appropriate. But I will say that the social change component seems to be the most difficult because often students are writing very broad social change claims without specifying those two elements that I talked about earlier. They aren't answering who will benefit from these findings and in what way. Often there's just one or the other of those elements that are specified. They'll actually talk about what their results could do, but they give no specifications to the mechanisms by which those changes might come about. They don't tell me who will actually be carrying out those positive social change results, or they'll give very broad audiences to their research, that these findings benefit all of society without specifying exactly who that includes. Scott, are there any other questions? I didn't see the question box alight.
Let's see. It looks like one just came in. Someone wrote, Christopher writes, it's also what comes last, so they often don't reflect deeply about it.
Yeah, Christopher, that's a good point. Yeah. And this is a lot of stuff to cram into one page, right? And so sometimes students simply just run out of room. But there are a lot of ways to streamline writing the abstract so that everything is included, everything flows nicely. There are certainly some tricks of the trade to make sure that you have ample room to write about your social change claims. Typically just a sentence is needed, but sometimes students run out of room there. Good point. Thank you. All right. So any other common struggles? I put up some here. Formatting and length errors. It's not uncommon for me to see some really creative margins happening or font sizes, grammar, punctuation, and spelling errors, use of in-text citations or references. As I said, those should not be included in Walden abstracts. The use of a specific city, school, or business name, those should be omitted from an abstract unless The study is a case study, or it's something where the focus on that one specific city or school or business name or some other location is the prime focus of this research, and omitting that would dilute the meaning of the study. Otherwise, general descriptions of geographic locations should be included in the abstract. So just for an example, instead of saying Urbandale High School was the focal point of this study, and really it's not a case study, it's not specific to Urbandale High School, I could simply say a school in the upper Midwest was the focus of this study. And that's the same kind of process applies with really overt pseudonyms. School ABC has noted problems with student achievement. Instead of using such an overt pseudonym, use a general geographic description. A school in the southeast of the United States was struggling with achievement problems. Okay, other common struggles. Research questions are presented as questions. We know now that those research questions should be presented as declarative statements. Numbers are written out as numbers rather than as numerals. And I'll explain here. This is a weird rule, but it's an APA rule that in abstracts, unless a number is starting at a sentence, starting at the very beginning of a sentence, that number should be written out as a numeral. So it should be the number 9 instead of the word 9, N-I-N-E. And that looks odd in the abstract, but it's APA rules. There's no answer to the so what question, so there might be a description about the gap in the literature in the beginning of the abstract, but there's no justification for why that gap is problematic or why we actually need to address it. Or there's a misalignment of research elements. So maybe every sentence, every independent sentence in the abstract is actually fine, but they don't hang together. That's another common struggle. So those are my lists, but I would certainly welcome others. And Scott, I'm seeing a little bit more action going on with that little question mark bubble. Any other questions or comments here?
Yes, a couple of comments and questions have come in. Christopher writes in that he senses with some students that higher order conceptual challenges not being able to synthesize their work.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and sometimes, your students have focused on their research for so long that they perhaps have become very comfortable with ways of articulating their research or their research findings that isn't really compliant with a one-page abstract. And it's really difficult for them to think in other ways and to synthesize those higher order concepts in a new way, something that's very succinct and yet descriptive enough that no details are lost. So that's a really good point.
And then we have one question from Jeff that came in. He asks, I'm curious, shouldn't the dissertation body state what you stated anyway? And I'm not sure exactly what message point we're talking about right then.
Yeah. Jeff, maybe could you clarify? I would love to know.
Referring to the school names.
Oh, sure. Well, sometimes in terms of school names, it's appropriate for the school name to be included in the body of the dissertation, and yet in the abstract, it's generally encouraged that a more general description is used instead of that exact school name. And that if there's ever confusion, always feel free to write me and we can look at the manuscript and then at the abstract and decide the best way to present that study location. But oftentimes, unless that school name is very particular, is really important to highlight, a general description should be used instead.
And looks like we're all caught up on questions.
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks, everybody. Okay. Oh, lack of cohesion and flow. Okay, so that's the last one, I promise. So sometimes all of the elements are there, and all the elements do indeed hang together, but they're so choppy, every sentence is the exact same length, or it doesn't seem to flow. It's not, the order of things isn't logical or is not organic. And if that happens, I'll do my best and with a very light editing hand, knowing that you and your students have worked a long time getting to this process, getting to this final milestone in the approval process, I'll do my best to increase that cohesion and flow of the writing without disturbing the content of things. But these are just more general common struggles that I see in our Walden students. Okay, so now it is your turn, a time to have a little reprieve from me talking scratchily at you. So what I'd like to do now is go over a couple abstracts. I've pulled abstract A from the Center for Research Quality's website, and I'll pull that up right here. And what I would like to do is take a few moments to read through it. Noting the general components of the abstract that are important to have here. And now, Scott, you also have links to these Word documents somewhere in this panel. Is that right?
Yes. If you'll look in the questions panel, you should see a link there in case you want to access that on your own. You can't see it in the presentation window.
Thanks, Scott. So we'll take just a minute, read through this, and then I'd like to go through it together, highlighting the components of what's necessary, and then we'll go on to abstract B, which needs your help. It needs a little bit of editing, so I'll give you just a moment. And just as a note, as you're reading, you can clearly see this abstract spans 2 pages, but in reality, this is a 1-page document. I've just pulled it up into this double screen view for your convenience in viewing, so that it's the font is a bit larger. Okay, so if you're still reading, no worries. We'll take this pretty slow, but I'd like to pull up the same document now with some track changes in it, and we can walk through the major elements that are found in this abstract to illustrate exactly where it hits at all the right points. And you might be thinking, I would have written this differently, and that's the beauty of the abstracts. Each one looks a little bit differently, but my hope is that this document just illustrates those major points. Okay, so here we have, I'll broaden this a little bit if I can. Okay, starting out the abstract A, maladaptive perfectionism has been associated with psychological disorders. It illustrates some of those disorders, and personality eating, obsessive compulsive disorders. Okay, so that's sort of building this case for why we should care about maladaptive perfectionism. And then it goes on to say that researchers have theorized some things about, what's going on with this maladaptive perfectionism. However, and here's where we're getting at the gap in the research. However, there's a paucity of empirical research that addresses this relationship. So not only has the student incorporated in a really kind of elegant way the theoretical framework, but he or she has also talked about the gap in the literature and justifying so what and who cares. Why should we care about understanding more of maladaptive perfectionism? Well, it's associated with a lot of rather troubling disorders. So right away, this is a really nice, strong introduction. We move on to the purpose of the study. I understand it's to examine perfectionism as measured by this specific scale. and moving on to more detail further on. And then these next few sentences actually give me the research design, the method, and the analysis. So it tells me that data were gathered from middle school students in rural eastern Colorado. It provides me the sample size, always necessary. And just little nitpicky things here. You see there's a space on either side of the equal sign. That's always a rule in APA. There should always be a space on either side of any mathematical operator. Greater than, equal than, signs, equal signs. I learned that factor analysis was used, and then discriminant analysis was also used. So that's also important. Tell me about the inferential or descriptive statistics that were employed. And then the results. Learning about exactly what factors were discriminated against and whether those findings were statistically significant. And then this final sentence, these perfectionism self-worth profiles provide pathways to researchers and mental health personnel. Right away I know who will benefit from these findings for facilitating social change by driving the development of interventions. So I know exactly what they're actually going to do with those findings, or what they could do. They could use these findings to drive the development of interventions. So, again, you might say, I can note problems here easily, Annie, or I would have written this differently, but I hope that you're able to see that for better or for worse, this abstract does hit the marks on all of the requirements from our university on a well-rounded abstract. Any thoughts or questions before we move on to the other one? All right. So let's move on to the other one. I'll flip back to abstract B. So abstract B needs your help. It has a variety of errors in it. This is an abstract that I wrote just for the sake of this exercise, but in reading hundreds and hundreds of abstracts, I think I've tapped into a lot of the errors, the common errors that are often exhibited in these abstracts. So look this through. I'll give you a few minutes, and then we'll go through it together. And as you are reading, feel free, please, to comment in the chat box or in the questions box of the errors you're seeing, because that'll help me to facilitate our discussion. Great comments so far. Deborah, you're catching some good ones. I'll give you just another minute. Okay. So if you're still reading, no worries. We'll take this really nice and slow. But I'll pull up my version of abstract B with some comments that I've included to note some of the major errors that I'm seeing. So right away you'll see that there's an indent in this abstract, which is a no-no. There should be no indent in Walden abstracts. It should be one paragraph that is flush all the way to the left side of the margin. And right away, Deborah pointed this out, there's a spelling error in the abstract. We're talking about the comparison between, or rather, we're talking about graduate students in both online and brick and mortar institutions, not brick and mortal institutions. Deborah's also right on in that there should be no references or citations in this abstract, and yet here we go, there's that parenthetical citation. And also there's a missing serial comma in the second sentence. Students report headaches, comma, sleepless nights, comma, and significant weight gain relating to this final substantial task. There is no comma there, but there should be one. I'm looking here. Yeah, you guys have added some really great stuff. Okay. Yep. Okay, and then Barbara is talking about citations. What were the theories? So as we move on in this abstract, there's the problem with the citations. You see what the goal of the study is. We want to assess Walden students' awareness of support services available to them on writing abstracts. Okay. The relationship between anxiety and awareness. 2 adult learning theories were used together as a framework for the study. Barbara asks, what were those theories? And exactly, Barbara, that's what I would ask. I want to know the names of those theories. Provide a little bit more detail, please. I'm seeing Jeff's comment. Jeff wrote, there are many problems, but the social change section is a perfect example of what you're saying about breadth and specificity. Yeah, right on, Jeff. So we'll get to that at the end of the abstract. Oh, Jeff, you asked about the Walden citation in the previous abstract. I provided that just to show you where I got it from, but that should not be included in the actual abstract. I just wanted you to know that it was from the Center for Research Quality. But good eye. Okay, so moving on, the student writes that the research design was a mixed method study. If I'm going to be really nitpicky, I would actually like to know what kind of mixed method study. Is it sequential? Is it concurrent? And then the student goes on, student being me, I wrote this, a 30-item questionnaire was used on a sample of recently graduated doctoral students. I would like to know sample size there. Then a subsample of those doctoral students were invited to participate in a focus group. I also want to know the subsample size. And then just there are other, grammar errors here. A subsample were. Subsample is singular. Were is a plural verb, so there's a subject-verb disagreement there. And then, anyone catching this error? Data was. I'm pulling up the question to see if anybody has noted this error. Any brave souls? Data were. Thanks, Jeff. Yep, so exactly. And this is kind of one of my pet peeves. Data is a plural noun, so it should always be data were analyzed through in vivo and SPSS. Yeah, exactly. Jeff, you are awesome. The weirdly singular version of data is datum. And so if a student is just very married on using the singular verb was, then it should truly be the datum was analyzed. Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. And then another one of my pet peeves, were analyzed through in vivo and SPSS. I wrote in the track changes comment, that's a vague description of the analyses. In vivo and SPSS, they are wonderful data software management tools, and yet they are not what's doing the analyses. You are doing the analyses. And by you, I'm directing that comment to the student. So exactly what approach was used to interrogate all that qualitative data? What analyses were employed to determine the relationships between your quantitative data? I want to know about t-tests or regression for quantitative data or any other inferential or descriptive statistic. For qualitative data, I want to know, were your data, or was your process purely inductive? Did you use a priori codes? Provide me with a little bit more detail beyond the fact that in vivo analyzed these data in your description of your results. Scott, are there any other questions?
No, it looks like that's it, Andy.
Okay, cool. Well, just kind of wrapping up with this rather problematic abstract. This final few sentences, there's no explanation of quantitative or qualitative findings. So in a mixed methods abstract, I know it might be difficult and that it's a lot of information to include on one page, but there should be some explanation, even a very brief one, of what happened, of what was learned from the qualitative findings, and some explanation of what was learned from the quantitative findings. And that's not here. And then, like what Jeff was saying, these social change claims are incredibly vague. Include the acquisition of knowledge, to which I would say, for whom? Who is acquiring this knowledge about writing abstracts in a high-stake environment? Is this for students? Is this for faculty? Is it for administrators? Who is the intended audience for this research? These findings will benefit society and will result in a better education for all. You know, the more specificity that can be included in this final sentence, always, always, always the better. Excuse me. Okay, thanks everybody for your participation in that. I hope that that was helpful. I think it's fun to look through an actual document together to really interrogate these texts and see what's strong, what can be improved. For as short a document as an abstract is, it's incredibly challenging to write. Okay, so we have about 10 minutes left. I want to chat just a little bit about titles, why they're important, and some of the things that I focus on in my review of titles. So why is a title important? Just like an abstract, it helps attract a reader's attention. It's important in computer-based literature searches. And the cool thing is that abstracts can, titles can assist with information recall. So what's been found in the literature is that titles that include both specific and general information about the material, that are also concise and descriptive, were associated with higher memory recall of the material within that larger study. So an effective title can actually can go a long way in helping the reader really remember the contents of that larger manuscript. And I did a quick literature review on titles just to see the taxonomy of titles that are out there, how they've been classified in the past. And this is sort of my silly application, all of the examples I provide in the right column to all of the various taxonomies of titles in the left. And you'll probably see that some of these types of titles are a little bit rare. You know, the attracting attention by alliteration, those that completely mystify, typically those title types are discouraged in scholarly writing. What we tend to see in our titles are these three types: declarative, descriptive, and interrogative, mostly fitting into the declarative or descriptive taxonomy. And I apologize, I'm looking into the questions. I'm seeing another question hand raised. Scott, is there any new one, or am I missing something?
Let me look. I didn't see one, but let me just take a second look. Nope, I think we've covered everything.
Cool, okay. So here's another time that we would love to poll you. So I'd love to know your experience, your perceptions on the common problems that you see in your own students' titles. And we have created not an exhaustive list by any means, but we're asking you, nevertheless, just to pick one of these things, or please feel free to write us in the questions box with your thoughts about other common challenges that you see or that your students experience in writing titles.
Okay, we'll give everyone about 5 more seconds, and we'll go ahead and close the poll. All right, looks like most of you have responded.
Cool.
Everyone should see the results now.
Okay, great. So the majority of you said titles are too long, and 20% said titles are too vague. And I know there was a question from Elizabeth on is there a suggested word number limit for titles? And Elizabeth, that's a great question. There is, and it's between 10 and 10 and 12 words. Deborah is asking, do you recommend that the student put the type of research conducted in the title? You know, Deborah, in the past, there were some pretty strict rules about whether or not the method type, you know, colon, a phenomenological study or something should go into the title. For me, that's not a deal breaker. If you think it's important and if there's actually room in the number limit, then certainly feel free to include it. If not, it's not a deal breaker if it's there or if it's not. And I think Jeff is joking it when he writes every title requires 1 colon. But here is my observations from my own. Okay, thanks, Jeff. But my own data collection, my own observations, is that titles are too long at Walden. So the average word count is also something that I include in my kind of simple data collection efforts for every abstract that I read. The average word count is titles are a little over 15 words in Walden capstones. And based on APA guidelines, which hold that titles should be between 10 and 12 words, that's a little bit over the limit. I'm not a huge stickler, you know, if a title is 15 words long and if every word in there seems absolutely necessary, then it should be kept. You know, that's not a big deal to me, but concision should certainly be practiced in titles, knowing again that information recall is stronger the more concise yet descriptive a title can be. Other observations that I found are that relationships between variables, they're often not specified. So an example that I provide here is information sharing among public safety agencies. I want to know, what about information sharing? Is there what relationship between those variables is actually being examined? And then finally, yes, colons are often way overused. I think there's this perception that a colon provides more formality to a title, where oftentimes, you know, unfortunately, it just adds unnecessary length to a title. The example that I provide here, that enabling K-12 teachers, all of that can be removed. And the rest of the title stands alone beautifully. Or even a study of can be removed. So simply teachers' preparedness for utilizing technology to reduce classroom administrative workload. A colon can often be appropriate if, and only if, the material after the colon elaborates on or modifies somehow the material before the colon. But if that can't be said with great real confidence, then the colon typically should go. So those are my observations. But, you know, like I said at the beginning of the hour, this is a time of collaboration. You know, I hope that you can share with me openly the questions that you have, ideas that we can better collaborate. You know, if more of these webinars or more resources would be helpful to you, you know, let me and let Scott know. We hope that this can be a time of a lot of celebration for your students. You know, this is the list that I provide here. This is for collaboration for titles specifically, but this is a time we can talk about the abstract and the abstract title page in general. This is the last milestone that your students are going through before their doctoral study is approved. My hope in my role as the CAO designee is that this can be a real time of celebration and with as little anxiety and uncertainty as possible. So I hope that, yeah, Jeff, absolutely. Share my example of a less than appropriate abstract with students. Absolutely, because I wrote it. Feel free to tear it apart, and there's no need to protect an innocent student out there. But my hope is that this time together is helpful to you, that you learned something, that that my virtual door is always open, and that you know to write me if you have questions. We've got 1 minute left, so I will welcome any questions, comments now, or of course feel free to email me at another time.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that great session today, Annie. We learned quite a good deal about um, abstracts and how to help with some of the things we see with them. So, and thank you all of our participants today. Great job of analyzing the different abstracts and the questions you had today.
Great. Thanks, Scott. Thanks for facilitating, and thanks everybody for attending.
Yep, and just to follow up everyone, we will include a link to the recording and the PowerPoint presentation. So thanks again, Annie, and goodbye for now, everyone.
Bye, everybody.